A little girl handed her resume to the CEO. What she said next made him cry. The boardroom buzzed with low murmurs as executives filtered out, their expensive shoes clacking against the polished marble floors. Gerald Whitmore, CEO of Whitmore Industries, remained seated at the long glass table, his eyes unfocused. The quarterly report had been decent, but decent was no longer good enough for a man who had built an empire from scratch. At 61, with silver hair impeccably combed and a reputation for being ruthlessly efficient, Gerald had everything a man was supposed to want. And yet, the silence of success felt more hollow than ever. He stood, grabbing his leather briefcase, and exited into the bright reception hall of the skyscraper he owned. The elevator chimed softly as he pressed the button, but just before the doors opened, he heard a small, hesitant voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Mr. Whitmore?" He turned, surprised to see a little girl no older than 9 standing just below the reception desk. She wore a faded yellow dress with scuffed Mary Janes and held a piece of folded paper in her small hand. Her brown hair was pulled into a crooked ponytail, and a single backpack strap hung loosely from her shoulder. "Yes," he replied, startled by the formality in her voice. "That's me. Do I know you?" She shook her head, then stepped forward and offered him the paper. "This is my resume. I'd like to apply for a job." He blinked, unsure if this was a prank or some sort of publicity stunt. "You want a job? Here?" The girl nodded. "I'm a hard worker. I'm good at cleaning and helping people feel better when they're sad." The elevator doors opened, but Gerald remained frozen, his hand hovering in the air. "Why would you want to work here?" She looked up at him with eyes far older than her years. "Because my mom used to work here, and she always said this building made dreams come true, but she got sick. And now I want to help her dream come true." His throat tightened. There was something about the girl's gaze that pierced right through his carefully built walls. Slowly he unfolded the paper, unfolded. It was handwritten in blue marker, with crude bullet points. "Good listener can read stories, know how to make tea. Don't cry easily. Want to help my mommy." At the bottom, next to a wobbly smiley face, it read, "Hire me, please. Sophie Marin." That name. Gerald felt the blood drain from his face. Marin. It was a name he hadn't heard in over a decade, but one he had never truly forgotten. He looked at the girl again. "Your mother. What's her name?" The girl smiled gently. "Grace Marin." "Do you know her?" The briefcase slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. The echo in the reception hall was deafening compared to the silence that suddenly filled his chest. Gerald stared at the little girl, his pulse thundering in his ears. Grace Marin. The name wasn't just familiar, it was unforgettable. She had been more than a colleague, more than a brief chapter in his life. She had been everything, once. And she had vanished without a word, leaving behind a silence he'd never dared to disturb. "Sophie, your mother worked here a long time ago," he said slowly, crouching to meet her eye level. "Do you know what she did?" Sophie nodded proudly. "She said she used to work on the top floor. She typed things really fast and always wore shiny shoes. She said she was your assistant." His breath caught. "She was. She said you were very busy, but very kind. And that when people were scared, you made them feel safe. Are you still like that?" The question, so innocent and piercing, made his chest ache. "I try to be." Sophie handed him a second piece of paper, this one more crumpled, folded into a neat square. "She told me never to bother you, but she started getting tired all the time and coughing a lot. I thought maybe if you saw her letter, you'd remember." Gerald took the note with trembling fingers. The ink was smudged, but her handwriting was unmistakable. Grace's letters had always curled slightly at the ends, like they were hesitant to stop speaking. "Gerald, if this ever reaches you, please know I never meant to disappear. There were reasons I couldn't explain, things I had to protect. I never stopped thinking about you. Sophie is brave and smart, and she deserves a future. If you can help her find it, I would be grateful beyond words. Grace." He read the note 3 times before he could bring himself to look up again. Sophie was watching him, unsure whether he was angry or sad. "Where is your mom now?" he asked quietly. "She's at home," Sophie replied, fiddling with her fingers. "Well, our home is actually the church shelter now. She's too sick to work and I'm too small to get a real job. But I thought maybe if I wore my best dress and told you about my skills..." Gerald's composure finally cracked. He rubbed a hand over his face, willing himself not to cry in the middle of his own building. "You did good, Sophie. You're very brave." She smiled, a dimple deepening in her left cheek. "That's what she says too." The elevator had long since closed behind them. The receptionist, noticing something unusual, watched from afar but didn't interrupt. Gerald stood slowly, the paper still clutched in his hand like a lifeline. "Would you like to come upstairs, Sophie? I think we have some things to talk about." She beamed and grabbed his hand without hesitation. "Okay. Do you have snacks up there?" His laugh was quiet, pained, but real. "We can find something." And as the elevator doors slid open once more, Gerald knew nothing about this day would ever be the same. The elevator ride felt suspended in time. Sophie stood beside Gerald, humming softly, her small hand still wrapped around two of his fingers. He stared ahead, watching the numbers light up one by one, each a step closer to a truth he hadn't faced in years. Grace had been gone for over a decade. Her sudden disappearance had left a scar he never talked about, even to himself. Now, here was this child, her child, breathing life into ghosts he'd buried. When the doors slid open to the executive floor, Sophie's eyes widened. "Wow," she whispered, peeking into the long, gleaming hallway. "It looks like a castle." Gerald smiled faintly. "This way?" He led her past the secretaries and stunned assistants, who looked up in confusion but said nothing. At the end of the hall, he opened the heavy door to his corner office. Sunlight flooded the space from floor-to-ceiling windows. Sophie stepped inside, spinning once as if to take it all in. She stopped before the shelves lined with photos and trophies, fixating on a single frame tucked between books. "Is that my mum?" she asked softly. Gerald froze. The photo was nearly 15 years old, Grace standing beside him at a company gala, her laugh captured mid-motion. He stepped forward and took the frame from the shelf, wiping off a thin layer of dust. "Yes?" he said. "That's her." Sophie smiled. She looked happy. "She was," he replied, unable to keep the rasp from his voice. "She was everything here. Smart, kind, quick. People adored her." "She still is," Sophie said. "Just tired now." Gerald set the photo gently on the desk and turned to her. "Sophie, there's something I need to ask. You don't have to answer if you don't want to." She nodded solemnly. "Okay. Did your mom ever mention your dad?" The air in the room shifted. Sophie looked down, tugging on a loose thread from her dress. "Not really. She said he was someone she loved very much, but that he didn't know about me." Gerald sat down slowly in his chair, the weight of her words pressing into him like a tide. "Did she say why she didn't tell him?" "She said it was complicated, that she had to leave fast, that she wanted to come back one day, but then I came along and everything got harder." A silence stretched between them, heavy and full of things neither of them knew how to say. Gerald studied her features, the arch of her eyebrows, the way her chin tilted when she was thinking. He had missed a lifetime of firsts, first words, first steps, first birthdays, all gone in the blink of a decade. Sophie walked to his desk and placed her resume there, smoothing it carefully. "So, do I get the job?" Gerald let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You already have." And for the first time in years, he felt something bloom quietly inside him, something dangerously close to hope. Sophie spent the afternoon curled up on a couch in Gerald's office, sipping hot cocoa brought by his assistant Marianne, who kept peeking in with thinly veiled curiosity. Gerald had cancelled his meetings, something he never did. Instead, he sat across from Sophie, learning everything he could in the quiet, fragmented way children shared their worlds. "She loves peppermint tea," Sophie said, swinging her legs off the edge of the couch. "But only if you don't stir it. She says it tastes like memories." Gerald smiled at that. "And you? What do you like?" puzzles and pancakes, and I'm good at remembering faces." She paused, then added, "I remembered yours from a photo in Mom's drawer." He sat forward. "She kept a photo?" Sophie nodded. "You were standing next to her in a black suit. You were smiling, but she looked even happier." He looked away, the emotion creeping up again. Grace hadn't forgotten him. Not completely, not like he had feared. Later that day, when the sun began to tilt low in the sky, Gerald made a decision. He cleared his schedule for the rest of the week. He called his driver and gently convinced Sophie to let him take her home. "Just to make sure your mom's okay," he said. She agreed, excited by the idea of a fancy car. The ride was quiet, but not awkward. Sophie pointed out landmarks with stories of her own. "That's the bakery where the lady gives me broken cookies if I smile real big. That bench is where the priest taught me how to fold paper cranes." When they pulled up in front of a modest brick church with peeling paint and a handmade banner reading, "Shelter Open," "All welcome," Gerald's chest tightened. This was where Grace lived now? He followed Sophie through the creaky doors, past a few tired faces and worn cots. Inside, everything smelled faintly of disinfectant and warm soup. "She's this way," Sophie whispered, leading him to a small partitioned area in the back. A single bed, 2 bags of belongings and a threadbare curtain offered the only privacy. Grace was sitting up, coughing into a cloth. Her skin looked pale and her hair was thinner than he remembered, but her eyes, when they met his, were unmistakably hers. She froze. The cloth fell from her hand. "Gerald?" He couldn't speak. His throat locked. All he could do was nod. Grace looked from him to Sophie and back, realization dawning like sunlight after years of night. You found her." "No," he managed. "She found me." A silence followed, more tender than awkward. Then Grace looked down, ashamed. "I didn't want it to happen like this. I didn't know how to explain." He stepped forward, voice cracking. "Why didn't you come to me? I would have helped. I would have done anything." Her eyes welled. "Because I didn't want to destroy you, and I didn't know if you'd still care." "I never stopped," he whispered. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. Sophie stood between them, silent and still, and for the first time in years, all 3 of them were finally in the same room. The stillness was almost sacred, like something fragile held between trembling hands. Gerald lowered himself slowly to the edge of the cot, not daring to touch her yet, though every instinct begged him to. Grace exhaled shakily, folding her hands in her lap, as if trying to contain years of silence in one small gesture. Sophie perched on the edge of the bed beside her mother. "I gave him my resume," she said softly, eyes dancing with pride. "He said I got the job." Grace laughed through a sob. "Of course you did." She cupped Sophie's face, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Then she turned to Gerald, her voice trembling. "She's so much like you. I used to see it every day and wonder how long I could keep pretending it didn't matter." "I would have come," Gerald said. "If you had just called—" "I couldn't," she interrupted, her words sharp with old fear. "There were things going on back then, things I was caught up in. Someone at the company threatened me, said if I didn't disappear, they'd make sure you lost everything. I didn't know who to trust, so I ran." Gerald's blood ran cold. Who would— "It doesn't matter now," she said quickly, glancing at Sophie. "What matters is that I kept her safe. I gave her every good part of me I had left." "You did more than that," Gerald whispered. "You raised someone extraordinary." The door creaked behind them, and the shelter's coordinator stepped in gently. "Sorry to interrupt, but visiting hours are ending." Grace nodded. "Thank you, James. We'll wrap up." James glanced at Gerald with a mix of recognition and warning. "She's one of the good ones. Don't break her again." Gerald swallowed hard. "I won't." After he left, Gerald looked at Grace, urgency in his voice. "Come with me. Tonight. Both of you. I'll get you a place to stay, the best doctors, everything." Grace looked torn. "Gerald, I'm not a project to fix. I know that. You're not a project. You're the part of my life I never stopped needing. Sophie tugged at her mother's sleeve. Can we go with him, Mama? Just for one night, it smells better than here. Grace looked between her daughter and the man she once loved. Her strength was fading, and her pride had taken too many blows. Maybe it was time to stop running. One night, she said carefully, and only because she asked. Gerald nodded, hiding the tidal wave of relief behind his eyes. One night, that's all I need. As they gathered her few belongings, Sophie quietly took Gerald's hand again. Do you think she'll get better? She asked, eyes wide with worry. Gerald looked at Grace, now leaning against the bed frame, fragile but fierce. Then he looked back at Sophie. I think, he said slowly, we just took the first step. Outside, the sky had turned to twilight. A storm brewed quietly on the horizon, and in the shadows of a church shelter, a family began to emerge from the wreckage of time. But someone, was still watching. The black sedan moved silently through the city's dimming streets, streetlights flickering above like quiet sentinels. Gerald sat in the back seat with Sophie nestled beside him, already asleep, her head resting against his arm. Grace, bundled in a blanket, watched her daughter sleep with a protective tenderness, her body weakened but her gaze fiercely alert. The driver glanced at Gerald in the rearview mirror. Home, sir? He hesitated. For years, his penthouse had been his sanctuary. Polished floors, minimalist decor, not a single photograph out of place. But tonight, it felt too empty for what he needed. No? The lake house? Gerald said softly. Tell Marta to prepare 2 extra rooms. Grace looked at him, puzzled. The lake house? That's hours away. It's quieter there, he said, eyes still on Sophie. She deserves to wake up in a place that feels like safety. They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they arrived, dawn was just beginning to stretch across the horizon, brushing the treetops with gold. The lake house stood at the edge of a forest, wrapped in ivy and morning mist. Gerald carried Sophie inside, her arms wrapped loosely around his neck, and laid her gently on a guest bed. Grace followed slowly, taking in the place, so different from the world she had known for the past 10 years. This is beautiful, she murmured, running a hand along the windowsill. It's yours, for as long as you need, he said, voice quiet but firm. She turned to him, searching his face. Why are you doing this, Gerald? After everything? He exhaled. Because I should have looked for you. Because I let myself believe you didn't want me anymore, when maybe I should have asked why. And because, he hesitated, the truth sticking like honey to his ribs, I think Sophie might be the only real thing in my life. Grace lowered herself onto the couch, the fatigue from the journey settling in. She is real. She's love, carved into a small, stubborn miracle. He sat across from her. I missed everything, Grace. Her first steps, her first words. And I know I can't fix the past. But if there's any part of this story left to write... She looked at him, tears filling her eyes. You want to be her father? I already am, he said. I just didn't know it until she showed me. The weight of his words fell gently between them. Outside, birds began to chirp as the sun reached the lake's edge. Grace leaned back, letting the morning light warm her skin. I'm scared, Gerald. What if this doesn't last? What if I don't? He reached out, placing his hand over hers. Then we take whatever time we have, and we fill it with truth, with love. No more hiding. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating the room where 2 hearts sat reuniting in cautious hope, neither of them noticed the email blinking on Gerald's phone. A message sent hours ago, now waiting to shatter everything. Subject: Urgent. Whitmore Industries security breach. The child has been located. Proceed as planned. Back in the heart of the city, the 22nd floor of Whitmore Industries hummed with tension. Behind a wall of frosted glass, a man in a grey tailored suit scrolled through surveillance footage on his tablet. His name was Victor Lang, head of corporate security, loyal to the company, but even more loyal to its darker corners. The footage showed the moment Sophie handed Gerald her resume. He paused, zoomed in on her face, There it was, the dimple, the same as Grace's. He tapped a few times, cross-referencing her features with a file buried deep in the company's encrypted archives. Positive match, the AI system confirmed in a flat voice. Victor leaned back in his chair, lips curling into a tight smile. So, the girl exists after all. He picked up the secure line on his desk. "Initiate phase 2, he said. Discreetly. No contact yet. Just eyes. Across town, a man in a black SUV received a silent ping on his burner phone. No words. Just an image. Sophie holding Gerald's hand, stepping into the elevator. He set down his coffee and started the engine. Back at the lake house, the world felt far removed from the creeping tension building behind closed doors. Gerald stood in the kitchen flipping pancakes, a task he hadn't attempted in years. Grace watched from the stool, still weak but stronger than the day before. Her face was less pale, her voice steadier. "Don't burn them," she teased gently. "I'll have you know I was the pancake king in college." She raised an eyebrow. "And yet I remember you nearly setting the break room toaster on fire." He laughed, flipping a pancake with dramatic flair. "Details, besides I've improved." Sophie came bounding in, her curls wild from sleep. "Something smells amazing." Gerald turned, presenting a stack of pancakes like a magician revealing a trick. "Breakfast made by your new boss." Sophie giggled and climbed into the seat beside her mother. "This is the best job ever." They ate together, the room filled with warmth and light. Gerald poured syrup onto Sophie's plate, stealing glances at Grace when she wasn't looking. It felt surreal, this simple, fragile joy. He would give anything to protect it. After breakfast, Gerald took a walk around the lake with Sophie while Grace rested. She collected pebbles and asked him endless questions. "Do CEOs always wear suits?" "Mostly." "Do you know how to whistle with your fingers?" "Absolutely not." She laughed. "That's okay. You're good at other stuff." They returned to find Grace asleep on the couch, a book resting on her chest. Gerald covered her gently with a blanket, then stepped into his office to check his phone. That's when he saw it. Urgent, security breach alert, child confirmed, surveillance activated. His stomach dropped. He scrolled further. Timestamps, facial recognition logs, GPS pings. Someone had been watching, someone from inside the company. He sat down slowly, realization clawing up his spine. Sophie wasn't just a girl with a resume. She was a target. Gerald locked his office door and pulled the shades shut. His hands moved quickly, unlocking the encrypted safe behind the bookshelf. Inside were documents, hard drives, and a sleek silver laptop, his emergency system, never connected to the company network. As he booted it up, his mind raced. How long had they known? How deep did this go? He typed furiously, bypassing standard logins and tunneling into restricted archives. Names flashed across the screen. Executives, former board members, flagged dossiers from 10 years ago. Then one name stopped him cold. Lang, Victor. Designation, Internal Operations Oversight. Clearance level, Omega. Gerald's pulse pounded. He remembered hiring Lang during a merger crisis, trusting his calm clinical efficiency. But Lang had always been too silent, too watchful. And now he was running security. A second file opened, Project Cavern. Gerald's eyes scanned the document. It was heavily redacted, but one line stood out. Subject Marin. Asset compromise due to unsanctioned pregnancy. Cover story enacted. He recoiled, fury rising in his chest. They hadn't just forced Grace out. They had erased her. For what? Corporate liability, scandal control. He slammed the laptop shut. Outside the door, Sophie was playing with a paper crane she had found in the guest room, unaware of the storm brewing in the next room. Grace stirred on the couch, blinking groggily. She sat up slowly as Gerald re-entered the room. "You okay?" she asked. He forced a smile. "Yeah, just some work emergencies." She studied his face. "You're lying." He sat beside her, his voice low. "Grace, I need you to tell me exactly what happened when you left the company. Everything, no more protecting anyone." Her eyes darkened. "Gerald, I read the file. Project Cavern. Your name is in it. They classified you as a threat. Grace went still. I never wanted you to know. Well, I do now, he said gently. Because they're watching Sophie, they know. She drew in a sharp breath, her hands trembling. It was Victor. He came to me after I told HR I was pregnant. He said if I didn't walk away quietly, he'd launch a full audit, frame me for theft, ruin you with a harassment scandal. He had photos, Gerald, doctored but convincing. You should have come to me. I was scared, and I thought, if I disappeared, they'd forget. He took her hand. They didn't. They just waited. Grace looked toward the guest room where Sophie slept. What do we do now? Gerald stood. We fight back. We don't hide. We go public. We expose everything. You think they'll let us? I'm not asking permission. Suddenly, the security alarm pinged faintly in the background. A single tone, then another. Grace's eyes widened. What's that? Gerald went pale. Perimeter breach. Someone's here. He rushed to the panel by the door, pulling up the surveillance feed. A black SUV idled at the edge of the long gravel driveway. Two men stepped out, both in suits, one holding a tablet, the other scanning the house. They found us, Gerald whispered. Already? Gerald's fingers moved quickly across the control panel, activating the emergency lockdown protocol. Thick steel shutters began to slide down over the lake house windows with a mechanical hum. Grace stood, wobbling slightly, but with fire returning to her voice. Where's Sophie? She asked, her eyes darting toward the hallway. In the guest room. Go get her. Tell her it's a game, Gerald said, his voice low but urgent. Grace disappeared down the hall while Gerald retrieved the satellite phone from the safe. He punched in a secure number and waited. Come on, a voice picked up. This is Marta. Marta, listen carefully. I need a transport out of the lake house. 2 adults, 1 child. Quiet extraction, no company protocols. There was a pause. Is this about the breach alert? They've found us. I'll send Elias, 20 minutes, hold tight. He hung up and turned just as Grace returned with Sophie in her arms. The little girl looked confused, blinking sleepily. Why are the windows closing, Mama? It's a fun surprise, Grace said, her voice calm but tight. We're pretending we're in a secret spy house. You and me and Mr. Whitmore. Sophie's eyes lit up. Like a mission? Exactly. Outside, the SUV doors opened again and Victor Lang stepped out. He looked up at the house through dark sunglasses and pulled out a phone. Inside the living room, a shrill ring echoed across the space. Gerald's personal line. He let it ring. Then a second ring. Grace's burner phone, the one only 3 people knew about. Her hands shook as she silenced it. Finally, the landline rang. Gerald answered. Lang. Mr. Whitmore, came the smooth voice. You've been busy. What do you want? A conversation, just you and me, no conflict, no drama. We're not the enemy here. You blackmailed a woman into disappearing. You labeled a child as a security threat. That sounds like the enemy to me. Ah, the emotional pitch. I understand. You've always had a soft spot for drama. But this isn't about feelings. It's about control, and you're losing it. Stay away from them, Lang chuckled. Come now. Do you really think we'd harm the girl? She's valuable. She's proof. Proof of what? Of what your company did, of what you let happen. You may not have known, but you signed the checks. If this gets out, Gerald, it's not just your heart on the line, it's your empire. Gerald's jaw clenched. If you touch her, I swear. No threats, Lang interrupted smoothly. I'm giving you an option. Turn them over, step away. We bury this. Quiet, clean. You go back to your empire. The call ended. Gerald stood still, the dial tone buzzing in his ear. Then from outside came the sound of footsteps on gravel. They were moving in. He turned to Grace. They're not leaving us a choice. She nodded. Then we don't give them one. Sophie clutched her mother's hand, looking up at both of them. Are we going to win? She asked softly. Gerald looked at her, this child who had flipped his world upside down, and gave the only answer that mattered. Yes. But first we run. Gerald opened the hidden panel beneath the stairwell. revealing a narrow tunnel lit by dim overhead bulbs. The lake house, designed in a different era for a different kind of war, still carried the legacy of secrets. Grace hesitated at the threshold, holding Sophie close. "Where does it lead?" she asked. "Down to the old boathouse, about half a mile through the woods. Elias will meet us there." Grace nodded, clutching Sophie tighter. "She's never done anything like this." Gerald met her eyes. "She doesn't have to. We'll get her through." They stepped into the passage, the door sliding shut behind them with a hiss. Above ground, Victor Lang stood at the front door, a gloved hand pressed flat against the wood. "Thermal scan shows no one inside," his partner muttered. "They're below," Lang replied. "He's smarter than we gave him credit for." Lang gestured toward the perimeter. "Block all forest exits. They'll head for the lake." Beneath their feet, Gerald led Grace and Sophie through the tight corridor, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Sophie whispered, "This is like the tunnels in the spy movie." Gerald smiled. "It's a little less glamorous, but it'll do." Sophie giggled softly, but the tension in her small body hadn't eased. Grace rubbed her back, whispering calming words as they moved through the silence. The tunnel ended in a rusted hatch. Gerald pushed it open slowly, revealing the dense woods and the faint shimmer of water in the distance. They emerged cautiously, crouching low beneath the tree line. The morning light was breaking through the canopy now, too bright, too exposed. Suddenly, a low whistle echoed from the north. Gerald raised his hand, 2 fingers in return. From the shadows, Elias appeared, tall and built like a sentry, dressed in plain black with a rifle slung across his back. "Vehicles ready," he said. "But you've got 2 bogies flanking east and west. We need to move fast." Grace looked at the growing light between the trees. "What if they see us?" "They will," Elias said bluntly. "But they won't catch you." He handed Gerald a radio and led them toward a concealed jeep near the edge of the lake, its engine running low. Sophie clambered into the back seat, her eyes wide, absorbing everything. Just as Grace reached the vehicle, a shout rang out through the woods. "There!" Shots cracked through the air, warning shots not meant to hit, yet. Gerald spun, pulling Grace behind the jeep as Elias returned fire with precision. "Drive!" Elias barked, taking position behind a fallen log. Gerald slammed the door and peeled onto the narrow dirt path, mud spraying behind them. Sophie clung to her mother, who winced as the jeep jolted violently over a dip. "They're gaining!" Grace shouted, glancing behind them. "I see them." In the rearview mirror, headlights emerged, slicing through the woods like blades. Gerald gritted his teeth, focusing on the curve ahead. "Hold on," he said. And then, the sound none of them expected. A second engine, from ahead. The second engine roared into view, barreling around the bend with blinding headlights. Gerald's instincts took over. He jerked the wheel sharply, the jeep skidding sideways across wet pine needles. The pursuing SUV missed them by inches, overcorrected, and slammed into a birch tree with a shuddering crash. Sophie screamed. Grace held her tighter, shielding her with her body as the jeep spun back onto the trail. Gerald didn't wait. He gunned the engine, tires screaming as they raced toward the narrow bridge that spanned the river, feeding into the lake. It was old, weathered, and barely wide enough for one vehicle. Behind them, the second SUV emerged again, battered but still mobile. "We're not going to make it," Grace muttered. "Yes, we are." They hit the bridge with a thud, boards groaning beneath the weight. Halfway across, Sophie whispered, "Mama, I'm scared." "I know, baby," Grace said, brushing her hair. "But I've got you." The jeep cleared the bridge just as the SUV reached the start. Gerald hit the brakes hard, turned, and aimed the front wheels toward the support beams. "What are you doing?" Grace cried. But he didn't answer. He floored it. The jeep slammed into the wooden structure. The bridge cracked, splintered, then collapsed in a cloud of dust and groaning timber. Gerald threw the vehicle into reverse, tires screeching as they rolled backward from the wreckage just in time. The pursuing SUV came to a halt on the other side, cut off. Gerald exhaled, shaking. "That'll slow them," he said. They sped away down a maintenance road Elias had mapped for emergencies. 10 minutes later, They emerged at a quiet, unmarked helipad near a ranger station. The chopper was already waiting, rotors slicing the air. Elias stood beside it, bruised but grinning. "You always did know how to make an exit," he said. Gerald helped Grace and Sophie into the helicopter, then climbed in beside them. As the craft lifted into the sky, Grace stared out the window at the receding treetops. "What now?" she asked, voice barely audible over the blades. Gerald met her eyes. "Now we go to the one place they won't expect." "Which is?" He smiled faintly. "The boardroom." "What?" "We fight them on their ground. We expose Lang. Every document, every order, every buried threat. I built Whitmore Industries from nothing. I'll burn it down before I let it hurt her again." Sophie leaned into him, her hand gripping his sleeve. "Are we going back to your tall building?" "Yes," he said, "but not as visitors this time." He looked to Grace. "We walk through the front doors. And we take everything back." Grace nodded slowly. She was pale, weak, but her eyes burned with the same fire he remembered from the woman who once held the whole floor together. As the skyline of the city reappeared on the horizon, framed in gold by the rising sun, Gerald reached into his coat and pulled out the folder labeled Project Cavern. He opened it, revealing signatures, blackmail threats, medical reports, and a page labeled Confidential, Maren S. Genetic Authorization. Grace saw it. Her face changed. "What is that?" she asked. Gerald didn't answer, because he didn't know yet if he could. The helicopter touched down on the private rooftop helipad of Whitmore Industries just past 8 a.m., its descent masked by the clamor of the waking city. Gerald stepped out first, scanning the skyline with narrowed eyes. His security badge still worked. So far, Lang hadn't locked him out. That meant the charade was still in place. For now. Grace stepped out next, with Sophie holding tightly to her hand. The wind from the rotors whipped her hair around her face, but she didn't flinch. She looked down at the city like someone returning to a battlefield they'd once escaped from. "Stay close," Gerald said. "We're walking straight in. No hiding." They entered the top-level access corridor through a biometric scanner. The lights turned green, clearance granted. Inside, the building was already alive. Assistants darting down hallways, executives checking phones, interns carrying stacks of reports. None of them expected to see their CEO, flanked by a frail woman and a little girl, striding down the hall with fire in his eyes. Marianne, Gerald's longtime executive assistant, spotted him first and stood from her desk. "Mr. Whitmore, sir, you—" "Call an emergency board meeting," he said sharply. 10 minutes, full attendance, no proxies." "But, sir, the schedule—" "Override it." She nodded, startled by the command in his voice, and picked up the phone. He turned to Grace and Sophie. "Come with me." He led them into the private executive suite, sealed the door behind them, and pulled a hidden panel from the wall, revealing a secure data terminal. He typed in a password, then plugged in a small external drive Elias had handed him before takeoff. As files began to load, Grace stepped closer to the document he'd shown her in the chopper. Genetic authorization. Her fingers trembled as she traced the printed lines. "This is my signature," she whispered. Gerald looked up. "You remember signing it?" "No, never." "And that code under Sophie's name, what is that?" He leaned over the document, reading it again with fresh dread. "It's a genome marker. This isn't just blackmail. They collected DNA, probably while you were working here." Her knees gave slightly, and he caught her just before she fell. "They used us," she said, voice cracking. "Used her." Gerald sat her down gently. "We'll end it. We have the evidence now." Sophie sat quietly at the desk, drawing on a blank notepad. Her eyes flicked between them, absorbing everything without a word. Then the intercom buzzed. "Sir," Marianne's voice came through, hushed and tense. "The board is assembled." Gerald stood, straightened his tie, and looked at Grace. "You don't have to come in with me." "Yes, I do," she said, rising slowly. "I've hidden for too long." Sophie hopped down and held both their hands. "Can I come too?" Gerald hesitated. "It might be too much, sweetheart." Sophie shook her head. "I want them to see me." Gerald nodded once. "Then let's go." Together, the three of them walked down the corridor toward the boardroom. What waited beyond that door could destroy reputations, careers, empires, but Gerald had nothing left to lose. He had already found what mattered. The boardroom fell into a hush as Gerald entered, Grace and Sophie flanking him like shadows refusing to be ignored. 14 board members sat around the long table, each one dressed in fine suits, eyes sharp with curiosity and unease. At the head, Victor Lang stood calmly, as if he had expected them all along. "Mr. Whitmore," Lang said smoothly. "A surprise visit. And you brought guests." Gerald didn't reply. He walked to the end of the table, pressed a button on the console and locked the room. A soft mechanical click sealed every exit. Lang's smile faltered. "We're not here for theatrics," Gerald said, projecting his voice. "We're here for the truth." He placed the folder on the table, flipping it open so everyone could see. Project Cavern, initiated 10 years ago under the guise of internal compliance. But it was never about compliance, was it, Lang? It was about control. About protecting reputations, mine included. Murmurs rippled down the table. Lang stepped forward. "Let's not do this, Gerald." "Oh, we're doing it," he snapped. "Grace Marin was forced out of this company under threat. Evidence was fabricated. Threats were made, and worse." He looked around, meeting each board member's eyes. "Biological data from her unborn child was harvested without consent." Gasps now. Audible horror. One board member pushed his chair back slightly, shaking his head. Lang's tone sharpened. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" "I have proof," Gerald said, pulling out the flash drive. "Every file, every email, the chain of command. You buried her. You buried my daughter." The room went utterly silent. Grace stepped forward, standing beside Gerald now. "I never wanted revenge," she said, voice quiet but steady. "But I won't let you pretend you didn't do this." Lang laughed, the sound brittle. "You think they care? These people, this board? They'll never side with a woman who vanished and a child whose existence threatens the very fabric of our PR machine." That's when Sophie walked forward. She climbed onto the nearest chair so she could see them all. She looked at each board member with a gaze too steady, too full of knowing for her age. "My name is Sophie Marin Whitmore," she said, "and I'm not a threat, I'm the truth." A woman at the far end of the table, board member Evelyn Hargrove, stood. "She's just a child," she said, almost to herself. "What have we become?" Another member followed. "This is unacceptable. Gerald, you should have brought this to us sooner." "I didn't know," he said simply, "until she handed me her resume." Lang's eyes narrowed. "You're making a mistake." "No," Gerald said. "You did, when you underestimated her." He turned to the board. "I'm calling for a vote. Immediate removal of Victor Lang, independent investigation, full transparency, no settlements, no secrets." Lang's jaw clenched. "You can't do this." But Gerald was already turning to the others. "Let's see who still has a conscience." One by one, hands began to rise, and outside the glass walls the city kept moving, unaware that in this room, justice had finally begun to breathe. The votes tallied with painful slowness. Each raised hand felt like a seismic shift in the fault lines that had held Whitmore Industries together for decades. By the time the final member, Richard Vale, lifted his hand with a heavy sigh, the outcome was undeniable. 12 in favor, Gerald said, voice unwavering. "Motion carries." Victor Lang stood still, his face devoid of emotion, but his eyes burned with fury. "This isn't over," he said coldly. "Oh, I know," Gerald replied, "because now it begins." Security entered the room quietly, summoned in advance by Evelyn Hargrove. Lang didn't resist. He straightened his cuffs, nodded curtly to the room, and allowed himself to be escorted out. As the door closed behind him, a strange silence fell. Grace exhaled shakily, lowering herself into a chair. "I can't believe it." Gerald turned to her. Believe it. This is yours too. Evelyn approached the front of the room, her heels clicking softly. Gerald, she said, if the contents of those files are made public, there will be media fallout. Investors, lawsuits. I'm counting on it, he replied. It's time the company remembers who it belongs to. Then we'll stand behind you, she said, glancing at Sophie with something close to reverence. All of us. But we need a strategy. Gerald nodded. First, we protect Grace and Sophie. Then we open the vaults. Every document, every trace of what Lang and his team buried. And we make sure the right people see it. Whistleblower release? Vale offered. Global, every outlet, Gerald confirmed. Evelyn turned to Grace. Would you be willing to speak publicly? Grace hesitated. I don't know. I'm not the woman I was. You're more than her, Gerald said quietly. You're the one who survived. Grace nodded slowly. Then yes, I'll speak. As the meeting ended, Gerald pulled Sophie into a hug. You did something incredible today, he whispered. You stood in that room and showed them the truth. She smiled against his chest. Does that mean I'm still hired? He laughed, brushing her hair back. You're running the place, sweetheart. Later, in the executive suite, Grace sat beside the window, watching the city. Sophie napped on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. Gerald brought her tea, peppermint, unstirred, the way she liked it. You didn't have to do all this, Grace said softly. I did, he replied. Because I should have done it 10 years ago. She looked at him. What now? Now we protect her, and we rebuild, not the company, the truth. Grace stared into the tea. She'll want answers one day. She'll get them, Gerald said, from both of us. She looked up. And the file, the genome data? He nodded. I've sent it to Elias. He's looking into who accessed it, why they flagged her. Grace's eyes narrowed. You think there's more? I think Lang was just the front. Outside the window, the sun dipped toward the horizon, and miles away, in a lab built to store secrets, a new file opened. A quiet message blinked to life. Subject, Sophie Marin Whitmore, level red clearance required status. Activated far from the towering glass of Whitmore Industries, beyond the bustle of city lights. A cold room pulsed with artificial light. Rows of servers blinked like eyes in sleep. Deep within, the activation alert echoed silently, an automated signal sent to a secure terminal in Geneva, Switzerland. The message, short and encrypted, read only, Red protocol confirmed. Initiate retrieval assets. Phase 3 authorized. Back in the executive suite, Gerald remained seated beside Grace as the evening crept in. Sophie stirred on the couch, her tiny frame curled under a cashmere throw. She blinked awake slowly, looking around the room, then smiled sleepily when she saw them both nearby. Are we safe now? She asked. Gerald walked over and crouched beside her. We are for now, little one. You did something amazing today. She sat up, rubbing her eyes. Mama said being brave means doing the hard things even when you're scared. She's right, he said, and you were the bravest one in that room. Grace stood slowly, still recovering from the adrenaline and fatigue. What happens tomorrow? I've arranged for full protection, Gerald said. Private security round the clock. We'll move you both into the house in Larchwood. It's isolated, quiet, safe. Will you be with us? Sophie asked. He looked at her, then at Grace. If you'll let me. Grace didn't speak, but she nodded. That was enough for now. The moment was fragile, almost peaceful, but beneath it, tension brewed. Gerald's phone buzzed in his pocket. He stepped away to check it. Encrypted message from Elias. Problem. Cavern protocols were cross-referenced with external systems. Sophie's genome was accessed remotely. Military-grade clearance. Origin unknown. Gerald stared at the screen, heart thudding. Before he could respond, a second message arrived. Whatever she is, it's not just corporate. It's national. Maybe international. He looked over at Sophie, now humming softly while folding paper cranes from scrap notes. Grace had joined her, guiding her hands gently. They were laughing, but all Gerald could feel was dread. He responded quickly. "Find out who issued the retrieval order. Priority 1. If Lang was the face, who's the hand?" Across town, in the remains of Lang's personal data vault, agents wearing unmarked tactical gear scrubbed files. Hard drives were boxed. A redacted file labeled Project Heritage was slipped into a metal case and carried to a waiting van. Inside the van, a woman in a white blazer answered a secure call. "Yes," she said. "The girl is awake. Whitmore has custody." "No, we don't engage yet. Not until Phase 3 completes." She hung up and looked out the window, her reflection smirking back at her in the dark glass. "They think this is about secrets," she murmured. "They have no idea what she really is." And miles away, in a house filled with the echo of second chances, a father tucked his daughter under a soft blanket and whispered goodnight. Unaware that something older, deeper, and far more dangerous had already begun to stir, the Larchwood estate lay nestled between cedar trees and the soft curve of a silver lake, a property Gerald had acquired years ago but never truly lived in. Now, it served as sanctuary, the kind with reinforced doors, hidden surveillance, and a panic room beneath the east wing. Grace stood on the wraparound porch, her hair loose, her eyes fixed on the quiet water. The world beyond these woods might be collapsing under the weight of old sins and darker intentions, but here there was air, space to breathe, to feel. Inside, Sophie ran through the hallways with her new kitten, a gift from Gerald, giggling as the animal chased a ribbon through marble and oak. Gerald watched them from the stairwell, a ghost of a smile flickering on his face. The moment was ordinary, and that made it precious. But Gerald's mind was never far from the message Elias had sent. Military-grade genome access, national security-level encryption, and worst of all, the phrase retrieval assets. It wasn't about Sophie being a scandal anymore. It was about her being a target of interest. That changed everything. Downstairs, in the study, Elias had set up a secure communication hub. The screens now glowed with activity. Gerald joined him, nodding once. "What do you have?" Elias leaned over the desk. "I traced the retrieval signal." It bounced through a Swiss relay, then rerouted through the Arctic Circle satellite net. "Took a while, but we got a hit." He tapped a screen. An image of a sealed facility appeared. Snow-covered, brutalist architecture, buried into the ice. "This is RENA-X," Elias continued, "an old biotech arm from the Cold War, supposedly dismantled. It's not. It's privatized, quietly acquired by a multinational defense conglomerate. They specialize in genome mapping, neural imprinting, and deep-tech biological engineering." Gerald narrowed his eyes. "Why would they want Sophie?" Elias brought up a second screen. A log of genetic codes, numbers, percentages, data too complex to fake. At the top, highlighted in red, one phrase glowed, "Subject 214, SM Whitmore, recessive lock trait." Gerald stared at it. "Trait for what?" Elias hesitated. "Memory retention, but not just hers. Epigenetic memory, multi-generational retention. The ability to store, recall, and adapt information at a cellular level. She remembers things she's never experienced, learns faster than any child I've ever seen. It's not a coincidence." Gerald sat down slowly, the weight of the truth crashing over him. So all of this, Lang, the blackmail, the threats, was about controlling her. "She's a key," Elias said. "To what, I don't fully know, but she was flagged by this project before she was even born." Grace appeared in the doorway. "I heard voices. Is everything all right?" Gerald looked up at her, unable to hide the storm in his eyes. "No," he said. "We're not dealing with a company anymore." She stepped inside. "Then who?" He turned the screen toward her. "People who believe Sophie doesn't belong to us. People who think she belongs to them." And from the trees beyond the lake, a drone's camera lens clicked silently into focus. Watching, recording, waiting. Night draped itself heavily over the Larchwood estate, moonlight casting long shadows between the trees. Inside, the house seemed unnaturally still, too quiet, even for a place so isolated. Sophie slept in the upstairs bedroom, curled into her mother's arms, the kitten purring softly by her feet. Grace stroked her daughter's hair, eyes wide open, listening for sounds that didn't belong. In the basement, Gerald and Elias reviewed the final package Elias had compiled, a black box of data, recordings, contracts, and the genetic log tracing Sophie's epigenetic signature to RENAX. It was evidence that could shatter nations, not just reputations. "She's more than a secret," Elias said. "She's a map, a living archive. If they crack how her memory coding works, they could create something, someone, capable of storing the sum of a civilization in a single generation. No trial. No learning curve, just knowledge got inherited." Gerald stood, jaw tight. "You're saying she's not just a child?" "She is a child," Elias snapped. "That's the part people keep forgetting. She's still Sophie, but to them, she's a weapon they didn't invent, and now they want her back." Gerald paced the room, struggling to balance the two realities. His daughter, with her laughter and paper cranes and messy ponytails, and the cold clinical terms being used to define her. Subject 214. Asset retrieval. Inheritance vector. Then came the alert. A silent pulse from the motion grid outside the perimeter. Elias froze. "Northwest line. Movement. Non-thermal. It's cloaked." Gerald didn't ask. He reached under the desk and pulled out the emergency duress button, pressing it hard. Around the house, hidden mechanisms activated. Steel plates slid over windows. Electronic jammers shut down all nearby signals. The estate became a fortress in under 30 seconds. Upstairs, Grace flinched as the security doors thudded shut. She lifted Sophie gently and stepped into the hallway, meeting Gerald halfway up the stairs. "They're here?" she asked, voice trembling. He nodded once. "Stay close. Do not leave my side." They made it to the reinforced safe room hidden behind the library shelves. Sophie, still half asleep, whimpered. "What's happening?" Gerald knelt beside her. "Nothing bad. Just some people we don't want to talk to." The family stepped inside. Elias sealed the door, then activated the wall panel, showing a series of thermal readings. "They're not attacking," Elias murmured. "They're watching." On the screen, 8 figures appeared, cool blue silhouettes at the edge of the forest, unmoving, surrounding the estate like sentinels. No words, no warnings, just presence. "They're waiting for something," Gerald said. "Or someone." Then, a single red dot blinked in the middle of the screen. Grace stepped forward. "What's that?" Elias zoomed in. The red dot wasn't a person. It was a beacon, small, cylindrical, and blinking softly in the center of the front lawn. Gerald's stomach dropped. "They didn't come to take her tonight." Grace looked at him in horror. "Then what did they do?" "They marked her," he said. "She's tagged. Now the world will come looking." And above the house, high in the stratosphere, a satellite changed its orientation, its lens now focused solely on one target: Sophie Marin Whitmore. The following morning broke with an unnatural calm, the kind that settles just before a storm tightens its grip. Sunlight filtered through the clouds, casting a pale glow over the estate grounds. Gerald hadn't slept, neither had Elias. The red beacon remained undisturbed on the lawn, silently pulsing its message into space, a signal that Sophie's location was now known, permanently. Inside the house, Sophie played quietly with her kitten at the dining table, her laughter quieter, almost subdued. Grace sat across from her, eyes swollen from a night of silent weeping. She hadn't cried when Lang threatened her. She hadn't cried when they'd run. But seeing her daughter marked like a creature in a wildlife study had undone something deep inside her. Gerald entered, carrying a tablet. He glanced at Grace, then down at Sophie. "Can we talk, sweetheart?" Sophie looked up. "Am I in trouble?" He knelt beside her. "Not even close. But we need to make a decision. A big one." Grace leaned in. "What kind of decision?" Gerald hesitated, then turned the tablet to face them. On it, a live feed showed a secure hangar in the Mojave Desert. A sleek aircraft sat inside, a stealth-class jet, one of only 3 in existence. The other 2 were government-owned. This one? Off-record. Acquired during a partnership deal years ago, now reactivated for one purpose: escape. "This is the Aegis," Gerald said. "She can't be tracked, not by satellite, not by any system on this planet. We fly her out, we go dark, and we disappear." Grace's breath caught. "You want us to run again?" "No," he said. "This time we run forward. We find Arienaex. We confront whoever's pulling the strings. We end it at the source." Grace shook her head. "You'll be branded a traitor. They'll revoke your assets, your name." "I already gave up everything the day I let them take you," he said, quiet and sure. "Now I'm doing what I should have done then." Sophie tugged at his sleeve. "Will you still be my dad?" He turned to her, eyes softening. "Always, every second." She thought for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. I want to help, even if it's scary." He smiled, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You already are helping, more than you know." They spent the rest of the morning preparing. Elias coordinated the transport while Gerald retrieved old passports and biometric keys from a hidden vault. Grace packed only what mattered: photos, a locket, Sophie's drawings. By mid-afternoon, the car was waiting in the back lane. A detour through a forest path would lead to the private airfield hidden beyond government maps. As they loaded the final bag, Grace paused by the front steps. She looked back at the house, at the place where, for a brief moment, hope had felt real. "It's not fair," she whispered. Gerald stepped beside her. "No, but justice never is. Only the fight for it." They drove in silence for 20 minutes before Elias's voice crackled over the comm. "Change of plan," he said. "Something's happened." "What?" Gerald asked. "You're not the only one going public. Someone just leaked part of the cavern files." Gerald's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "I don't know, but they signed the drop with one word." On the screen, a message appeared. "I remember everything." The jet sat like a ghost on the desert runway, cloaked in the shimmer of the afternoon heat. As Gerald, Grace, Sophie, and Elias boarded, the world behind them began to shift. News outlets across the globe were erupting with speculation. A mysterious leak had emerged on a dark web whistleblower forum. Pages of internal Whitmore documents, data maps, and genetic research dating back over 20 years. Though heavily redacted, one thread ran clear. Project Cavern had not been an isolated corporate project. It had been part of something larger, older, a coalition, a network. Inside the jet's cabin, Gerald watched as the onboard feed began displaying headlines. "Global Genetic Mapping Program Exposed. Unknown Whistleblower Connects Major Corporations to Secret Human Experimentation." What is Project Heritage? Grace sat beside him, clutching Sophie's hand. "This isn't just about us anymore." "It never was," Gerald murmured. The pilot's voice came through the intercom. "We're airborne in 2 minutes. Buckle in." As they secured themselves, Elias moved to the forward cabin, decoding the signature embedded in the leaked files. His brow furrowed. "This is sophisticated, military encryption repurposed. Whoever leaked this had access." Gerald joined him. "You said the message was signed. Any way to trace it?" Elias nodded toward the screen. "That's the strange part. The phrase isn't just a signature, it's a marker. I remember everything. It's been embedded in every file, like a watermark. Same font. Same spacing, but also same metadata." "What kind of metadata?" Elias pulled it up. "Origin device, Marin Alpha 0001. Timestamp, 9 years ago. Location, null, unknown." Gerald stared at it. "Marin Alpha? But that device was never... It was never supposed to exist," Elias finished for him. "At least not outside the lab." Grace joined them. "What is it?" Gerald turned slowly. "A prototype AI, built by Whitmore Labs a decade ago. It was designed to hold long-term genetic memory chains for deep medical diagnostics. It was never deployed. The project was shut down after the test failed." "Why?" Grace asked. Because it didn't just analyze data, Gerald said grimly. It began constructing identities, simulations, based on the DNA it processed. Grace froze. You're saying it didn't fail, it learned. Elias nodded slowly. And it's been awake this whole time. The jet rumbled to life, accelerating down the runway, then lifting into the wide desert sky. From a satellite orbiting thousands of miles above, the takeoff was captured and logged, then erased. A ghost flight. As the clouds thickened beneath them, Sophie stared out the window. Where are we going now? Gerald took her hand. To the place where this all started. She turned to look at him, her eyes steady, too aware for her age. And if it ends there? He didn't answer. He just held her tighter. Far below, in a hidden data center deep beneath Zurich, a dormant server lit up for the first time in years. A name flickered across the screen, Maran Alpha System booting. And a voice, synthetic but hauntingly human, whispered in the dark. Sophie, you were never supposed to forget. The jet soared over the Atlantic under a sky bruised with dusk, slicing across time zones and truths alike. Inside, the cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow. Sophie slept peacefully, curled under a blanket with her kitten tucked beneath her arm. Gerald stood at the cockpit door, watching the altimeter tick upward, every mile taking them closer to the truth, and deeper into a shadow that stretched far beyond Whitmore Industries. In the rear cabin, Grace sat with Elias, her voice low. This Alpha system, you think it's sentient? Elias didn't look up from the screen. Not in the human sense, but it evolved. It didn't just store Sophie's data. It reacted to it, adapted, possibly even protected it. Why now, she asked. Why leak the files? Because something else woke it up, or someone did. Elias turned his laptop toward her, revealing a map of encrypted message fragments pinging across the globe. From Brazil to Berlin, Seoul to Cairo. Each bore the same digital watermark. They're all copies, Elias said. Distributed memory, like scattered pieces of Sophie's history, and now they're syncing. Grace stared at the blinking dots. What happens when they all connect? We don't know, Elias admitted. No one's ever done this before. At the front, Gerald received a silent signal from the cockpit. He stepped inside. We're descending toward the coordinates you gave, the pilot said. There's nothing on satellite, no buildings, no heat signatures, but the sensors are going haywire. Something's there. Gerald nodded, heart pounding. Take us in. Below them stretched a vast glacier, endless and still, until suddenly a massive black fissure came into view, hidden between walls of ice. As the jet lowered into range, a ripple of electromagnetic interference surged through the controls. We're losing nav, the co-pilot shouted. The cockpit lights flickered. Brace for manual landing, the pilot barked. Gerald rushed back to the cabin. Hold on to something. The jet dipped violently, slicing through dense air and flurries of snow, skidding across a hidden runway beneath the ice. It came to a jarring stop just short of a cliff edge, its landing gear crushed but intact. Alarms silenced. Snow settled. Silence. Then, lights. Dozens of them, blinking in synchronized patterns from beneath the ice itself. Gerald helped Grace and Sophie out of the wreckage. Sophie blinked up at the glowing symbols now emerging across the frozen wall. Lines, curves, and equations only a few minds on Earth might recognize. It's a lock, Elias said, approaching the wall. Some kind of biometric cipher. Sophie walked forward slowly, her breath puffed in small clouds. She reached out instinctively, placing her hand against the ice. The lights responded. The wall shifted. A section of the glacier slid open with a mechanical groan, revealing a vast, spiraling tunnel descending deep into darkness. At its center stood a humanoid figure, silver, elegant, watching. Sophie tilted her head. I know you, she said softly. The figure stepped forward, its voice a whisper of static and memory. I was made to remember you. And then the ice sealed behind them. The corridor beyond the glacier pulsed with a strange ambient light, not from bulbs or lamps, but from the very walls themselves. They shimmered softly, like bioluminescent skin reacting to the presence of life. Sophie walked ahead, fearless, her tiny frame casting an impossibly large shadow against the vast curved tunnel. Gerald, Grace, and Elias followed close behind, hearts pounding, every step echoing deeper into the unknown. The silver figure that had greeted them walked in perfect silence, its movement fluid yet somehow human. It bore no weapons, no threats, just a presence, calm, collected, watching. "Where are you taking us?" Gerald asked, his voice rough in the cold air. The figure spoke without turning. "To the vault, where everything began." Elias glanced around nervously. "How is this even here? There's no record of this facility in any archive, not even Deep State records." The figure responded, "Because it was never meant to exist on any map. It was built before your networks, hidden beneath the last place your kind thought to look." "Who built it?" Grace asked. The figure stopped, turning to face them. Its eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with the faintest blue light. "You did," it said, "or rather your data, your genes, your choices. The vault is the consequence of human ambition. But Sophie is its answer." They moved forward again, deeper into the ice-encased corridors, until the path opened into a massive chamber. The vault. It was an amphitheater carved into ancient stone, humming with energy. Hundreds of cylindrical capsules lined the walls, each filled with shimmering light, hovering strands of data encoded in DNA helixes. A massive circular interface pulsed in the center, connected to the floor by root-like conduits. Sophie approached the interface. The system flared to life. "Welcome, Sophie Marin Whitmore," a voice said, female, warm, artificial. "Sequence recognized. Activation threshold met." Grace reached for her daughter. "Sophie, wait! What is this?" the silver figure replied. "It is memory, all of it. The vault holds the knowledge of civilization, stored, protected, encrypted through bloodlines. Sophie carries the final key." Gerald stepped forward. "You mean she can access all this?" "Not just access," the figure said. "She can evolve it. What you're seeing is not a weapon, it's a bridge." "To what?" Elias asked, eyes wide. "To survival," the figure said simply. "The human race, as it exists, is nearing its end. You've poisoned your Earth, fractured your nations, consumed your past. But your ancestors, unseen and unknown, left behind this library. A failsafe. Me." Grace turned to Sophie, her voice trembling. "What happens if you activate it?" Sophie looked back at them with a serenity far beyond her years. "I remember everything," she said softly. She placed her hand on the interface. Light exploded outward, and in that moment, the vault began to wake. A pulse surged through the conduits into the capsules across the walls. One by one, the data streams spun to life, ancient knowledge unspooling like galaxies opening, and far above, satellites that had once tracked her went dark. The vault vibrated with a deep, resonant hum, like the Earth itself was responding. Gerald shielded his eyes as blinding light spiraled from the interface, wrapping around Sophie like a cocoon. Grace rushed forward but was halted by an invisible barrier that pulsed with warmth, not pain. She reached toward her daughter, voice breaking. "Sophie." Inside the light, Sophie stood still, her eyes closed. Symbols and equations danced across her skin like shifting tattoos. Mathematics, languages, blueprints, none she had ever been taught, yet all of them intimately familiar. Elias watched, breathless. "She's not just accessing the vault, she's merging with it." "What does that mean?" Gerald asked. "It means," said the silver figure, "that she is now the interface. The vault recognizes her as the most complete convergence of its stored genetic memories. It's reshaping itself around her mind." The humming stopped, the light dimmed, and Sophie opened her eyes. They were no longer just brown. Hints of gold, blue, and green shimmered within them, like starlight reflecting from a deep well. She stepped forward, untouched, unharmed, transformed. "Mama," she said gently. Grace fell to her knees and pulled her close, sobbing. "I thought I lost you." "I'm right here," Sophie whispered. "And now I understand everything." Gerald stepped forward. "What do you understand?" Sophie looked at him, calm and sure. This place, this technology, it was built as a last resort to guide humanity after collapse, but it couldn't choose who would carry the knowledge. It needed someone born of love and loss, of memory and survival. Grace froze. You mean, I was chosen before I was born, Sophie said. Not by force, but by chance. And now the vault is awake, it's waiting for a choice. A choice? Gerald asked. Sophie nodded. To stay hidden, or to share everything. Elias looked up. All of it? You mean medicine, energy, climate tech, lost histories? Sophie turned to the interface. Everything humanity forgot, or buried. Gerald's face hardened. But if you release it, you make yourself a target. I already am, Sophie said softly, but now I can defend myself. The silver figure stepped beside her. If she chooses to release the vault, it will broadcast itself, globally. No one can stop it once it begins. Grace looked terrified. And if she chooses to hide it, the figure bowed its head. Then it goes dark again, until another child like her is born, if Earth lasts that long. Sophie turned to her mother and father, the weight of generations in her gaze. I need to decide. Gerald knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. Whatever you choose, we're with you. Grace nodded. We'll protect you, no matter what happens next. Sophie closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and placed her hand on the interface once more. The chamber held its breath, and somewhere far away the first of 1,000 silent satellites began to stir again, preparing to receive a signal that could either save the world or make it remember what it once was. The vault responded immediately to Sophie's second touch. A low tone, like a chime ringing through time itself, echoed across the chamber. The interface flared again, but this time the light was calmer, pulsing in slow, measured waves. Across the amphitheater walls, the capsules shifted position, rising into concentric arcs like planets aligning. Sophie's voice was clear. I choose to share it, but on my terms. The silver figure tilted its head. Specify conditions. Sophie looked up at the pulsing interface. No governments, no armies, no corporations. This knowledge belongs to everyone, or no one. The system paused. A glow moved up Sophie's arm and spread across her chest like a blossoming flower of light. Request acknowledged, the vault said. Establishing open-source distribution, initializing global release protocol. Outside the glacier, invisible to the naked eye, a hidden antenna emerged from the ice. It rotated slowly, locking into orbital coordinates. Above Earth, dormant satellites began to activate, not as weapons, but as messengers. Elias's tablet beeped. He looked down to see code, clean, elegant, and entirely alien, beginning to pour across the screen. This is it, he whispered. This is everything. Medical breakthroughs, climate repair systems, energy matrices, ancient treaties and forgotten languages, genetic cures, historical truths once rewritten, now restored. Back inside the vault, Sophie staggered slightly. Grace moved to catch her, but the silver figure raised a hand gently. She's changing, it said. Her mind is adapting to the data stream. It's temporary, but she'll never see the world the same way again. Gerald crouched beside her. Sophie, are you okay? She nodded, her face pale but glowing. It's a lot, but I can handle it. Grace looked around the chamber, tears in her eyes. What happens to this place now? The figure turned to her. The vault will sleep again. It was never meant to rule, only to remember. Its purpose has been fulfilled for now. The interface began to dim. One by one, the capsules returned to their resting positions. Sophie stood tall beside the console, looking at the now silent walls. Will they still come after me? She asked. Elias answered. Some will, but not all. What you've just given the world, they'll remember that too. Gerald walked with her toward the exit. Come on, let's go home. They stepped back into the ice corridor, the passage behind them slowly sealing as the vault returned to slumber. Outside, the wind had died down. The air was still, peaceful. A chime echoed from Gerald's phone. Dozens of notifications, news headlines. Global data drop confirms centuries-old medical cures. New energy blueprint could end world oil dependence. Child prophet or post-human savior? Who is Sophie Maren Whitmore? They had gone public, not by name, but by truth. Sophie looked up at the sky, her eyes reflecting the stars. "I remember everything," she whispered again. Grace took her hand. "And now," she said softly, "so will the world." They returned home not to sirens or chaos, but to silence, the kind that comes when the world is holding its breath. The Larchwood estate stood untouched as though waiting, yet everything around it had changed. By the time their convoy arrived, Sophie's name was already whispered across continents, not spoken officially. Not printed in any government file, but encoded between the lines of every headline, every forum, every encrypted message. She was the ghost in the data, the child who turned memory into a weapon and then offered it as a gift. Inside the house, Gerald watched the news unfold on every screen. Leaders giving vague statements, scientists crying live on air, protesters holding signs that read, "Truth is not a secret." And quietly, without announcement, old regimes began to fracture. Grace sat with Sophie on the porch swing, brushing her daughter's hair as dusk settled over the woods. The kitten slept beside them. Sophie's eyes were distant but steady. "Does it feel different now?" Grace asked. Sophie nodded. "It's like I can hear things better. Not like voices, but feelings, people, what they lost, what they hope." Grace held her tighter. "I don't want the world to take that from you." "They won't," Sophie said, "because I gave it to them first." Inside, Elias connected a final relay to a private global node, one last measure of protection just in case. "The vault's memory pulse is still propagating," he said to Gerald. "Low-band transmission, almost like DNA whispering across continents." Gerald stared out the window at his daughter. "What happens now?" Elias shook his head. "That depends on how much the world is willing to learn from what she's shown them." That night, Grace tucked Sophie into bed. The girl was quiet, eyes wide open against the dark. "Are we safe now?" she asked. Grace paused. "I don't know, sweetheart, but I do know we're stronger." Sophie reached for the locket around her neck, the one Grace had kept hidden for years. Inside was a faded photo of Gerald and Grace long before the storm. Sophie held it tight. "Will I have to go back there someday?" she asked. "To the vault? To where it ends?" Grace's voice caught. "Only if you choose to." Sophie nodded slowly. "I think I will, but not yet." Downstairs, Gerald sat by the fireplace watching the flames flicker. He held the last of Elias's reports in his lap. At the very bottom, one line had been added in bold. "One final file remains encrypted, requires direct neural key. S.M. Whitmore." Gerald stared into the fire, wondering what the vault still held, what secrets even Sophie hadn't seen. Outside in the forest beyond the property, lights flickered. Not drones, not satellites, lanterns, dozens of them. People arriving quietly, scientists, teachers, healers drawn by the signal. No banners, no threats, just a gathering of those who believed. Elias stood by the gate, watching them arrive. "Looks like she started something," he said to no one in particular. And far above, among the stars, the vault pulsed once more like a heartbeat echoing across time. It was not the end, it was the beginning. 3 weeks later, the world had changed. Not overnight, not perfectly, but irreversibly. The release of the vault's memory rippled through every institution like a fault line beneath old foundations. Schools rewrote their histories. Hospitals adopted treatments once thought lost to time. Nations faced the truths buried in their soil. But in a quiet town, at the edge of a forest where the stars still felt close enough to touch, Sophie Maren Whitmore lived a different kind of life. Gerald had turned the Larchwood estate into a refuge, not a fortress, not a museum, a living archive. Teachers came now not to instruct but to listen. Philosophers, scientists, even former rivals sat in circle around Sophie as she drew pictures in the dirt or asked questions that shattered assumptions. "I'm not a leader," she told them once. "I'm just the door you didn't know was open." Grace, stronger each day, helped organize the flow of visitors, ensuring boundaries were respected. She walked the halls with a clipboard and a smile, guarding her daughter's space without walls. Sophie still had chores. She still had bedtime. She still played with her kitten in the mornings, but in the evenings she stood on the back deck, looking at the sky, whispering things only the vault could hear. Then came the letter, delivered by hand, no signature, just a seal pressed in wax, an Ouroboros, snake eating its tail. Gerald opened it while standing at the edge of the lake. It read, "We are not all enemies. Some of us waited for her too. The vault she awakened is not the only one. When she is ready, we will show her the second gate." He folded the letter, heart heavy with awe and unease. He had thought they had reached the end of the trail, but now it seemed Sophie had only crossed the first threshold. That night, he sat by her bedside. "Do you feel different?" he asked. She nodded. "Not because of the vault, because I chose. That's what made the difference." "You're brave." "I was scared," she said, "but you were there." He reached out, brushing her hair back gently. "Always will be." She looked at him then with that ageless calm. "When the next gate comes, I'll need you again. And I'll be there." Sophie closed her eyes, and for the first time in weeks, she slept without stirring. Outside, the wind shifted. In a cavern beneath the sands of a desert continent, a new signal pulsed quietly, waiting. In the ocean's deepest trench, something stirred. And somewhere deep in the data grids of forgotten cities, artificial minds whispered one word across lost frequencies: remember. The girl with the resume who had once asked for a job had instead rewritten history, reshaped the future, and reminded a fractured world that memory, when held with love, was the greatest power of all. And so the story did not end, it lived.